Hey, you're on the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. Got a little new music I'm trying out here. I had to get some music I didn't have to pay for. Otherwise, they charge you an arm and a leg. You're on the Bible Forum. It is the next to the last Sunday in May 2021. Next week is Memorial Day. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. I don't know how long it'll take. It doesn't really matter because I'm here till I'm done. But I want to tell you the kinds of things that I saw going on this week in Israel. Been paying any attention to these folks over there? A neighbor starts throwing hand grenades at your house, threatening your life. You try to talk to him, doesn't care. So ultimately, you retaliate with overwhelming power to make the point and to get him to the place where he realizes this is not cost effective. Then what? Then you get labeled a bully, or worse. Turns out a wealthy friend was financing your neighbor's effort with your blood and property in order to run you out of town. You see, in all of this, you're the victim. But public opinion is still against you because, well, ultimately, you're the problem. No matter what you say, no matter what you do, you're the problem. Why? Well, because this is the Middle East. It's the Middle East at the end of the age. A more than 4,000-year-old battle between half-brothers, sons of Abraham, Ishmael by an Egyptian handmaid, and Isaac, the son of promise, according to God. The sons of Isaac have been out of the land for generations due to a series of kings and nations who want that land. That they are now back is nothing short of a divine miracle. That they will stay is nothing short of divine providence, outlined in the ancient prophetic scriptures of Israel and in the New Testament church. May 23rd of this year, 2021, just this past week, there was an article in an Israeli publication that said, according to IDF spokesman Brigadier General Hadi Zilberman, the Israeli Defense Forces in 11 days, with something called Operation Guardian of the Walls, destroyed some 62 miles of Hamas tunnel network in the Gaza Strip. Speaking hours after Egyptian brokered ceasefire took effect on Friday, Zilberman reported that some 200 Hamas operatives, including 25 high-ranking members, had been targeted and killed in IDF strikes during the fighting in Gaza. Israeli forces also demolished some 340 rocket launchers and 70 multi-barrel rocket launchers, as well as 35 mortars. 10 Hamas government offices were destroyed, as well as 11 buildings belonging to its internal security forces and 5 banks used by Hamas. Israel also targeted and destroyed what they claim are dozens of training camps and outposts, at least one command and control center, and 9 high-rise buildings that housed Hamas infrastructure. The IDF also destroyed several dozen anti-tank targets and 2 unspecified maritime threats. Zilberman also said that 2 drone attacks by Hamas had been thwarted and said that Hamas's manufacturing and development capabilities had been degraded. As for the performance of Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, Zilberman said that over the course of the operation, the system had intercepted 90% of the incoming rockets that they deemed posed a threat to populated areas. After Israel's diplomatic security cabinet voted on Thursday night to accept the ceasefire, Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz said, quote, The defense establishment maintains its willingness to defend the citizens of Israel, and the security forces and the IDF are deployed in the field on all fronts, and that for defense and offense. The reality on the ground will decide how we continue to operate. Gantz said that the IDF and Israel's other security forces had secured military achievements unprecedented in their power, precision, and strategic significance during this operation. So who's behind the attack on Israel? JewishNewsService.org talked about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu talking on Thursday that Israel intercepted an armed drone earlier this week sent by Iran. It was shot down over northern Israel, crossing from Iraq or Syria, during a meeting with German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, emphasizing the fact that the true patron of terror in the Middle East and in the world is indeed Iran. Iran not only, he says, supports completely the Islamic Jihad in Gaza and gives them all their finances, they also give weapons to Hamas and Hezbollah. On May 21st, Jewish News Service reported that a member of the Palestinian Security Forces had warned Israel in a video that appeared on various Palestinian online outlets May 18 that it would pay a very steep price. In the video, the member said Palestinian security forces are not the guards of the enemy's settlements, and that any Jewish settler discovered on the road in Judea and Samaria will be shot. He said, "We will trample the heads of the settlers occupying our land. Allah willing, we will fly the banner of victory on the minarets of Jerusalem. Therefore the settlers are prohibited from moving on the roads of West Bank. Whoever violates this will be met by bullets." The time has come, he said, to face bullets with bullets and death with death. So, what have we learned? ProphecyNewsWatch.com says we haven't learned anything we didn't already know. The Palestinians are not working alone. They have ideological and financial backers in the Middle East. America supports Israel when Republicans are in office and tolerates them when Democrats are there. While the Biden administration largely supported Israel's right to defend itself, it soon became clear as the conflict wore on that impatience was growing in America, largely among Democrats, over both U.S. support for Israel and the proportional use of force in the Gaza Strip. At the same time, the conflict also came amid negotiations between Iran and world powers over a nuclear deal, as the Biden administration has made it a priority to re-enter the 2015 deal, officially called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. Experts say the role of Iran behind the conflict, as well as Hamas's own bid for dominance in the Palestinian arena, isn't something that can be overlooked. Michael Doran, a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, told Jewish News Service that, quote, "From a strategic point of view, both Washington and Jerusalem should frame the Gaza conflict as an attack on American security systems in the Middle East." Unfortunately, he said, the Biden administration is appeasing Iran, most notably at the negotiating tables in Vienna, where Americans seek to coax Tehran back to the JCPOA. The appeasement, he said, on the nuclear question leads to appeasement across the region, adding that the Biden administration cannot acknowledge the role that Iran is playing in Gaza, because if it does so, it will be asked to leave the negotiating table in Vienna. Doran noted that it is a well-known, documented fact that rockets and missiles produced and obtained by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are indeed funded by Iran. These terror groups openly acknowledge their strategic connection to the Quds Force for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, he said, avoiding anything that will make them angry. But here's the question. Have you read, have you heard any of this in our news? Isn't the news supposed to tell us what's going on, just to report the facts? The director of the project on regional Middle East developments at the Jerusalem Center said U.S. officials, quote, sure don't sound as if they consider Iran to be a threat. They sound like they want to accommodate it. They're avoiding anything that will make Iran angry. Cooperwasser noted that even when the United States stopped the massive shipment of arms to Yemen earlier this month, quote, they didn't say where it came from. The language used is to avoid confrontation with Iran. Another major issue that arose during the conflict against Hamas centered around a $735 million arms sale to Israel, approved by the Biden administration before hostilities began. Progressives in the Democrat Party have called for a review of the sale. Some have promised to block it as they falsely accuse Israel of targeting innocent civilians in Gaza. The question becomes, how can they say Israel is targeting innocent civilians? This is war. We bombed Berlin, as they say, back into the Dark Ages. Why? Because unconscionable warmongers hide out among civilian populations. It's always been that way. Berlin attacked the Western world. Israel was attacked. Why is she not allowed to defend herself and to punish the people who tried to kill her? Israel, for her part, announced her targets well ahead of time, hour or more, to give innocents the opportunity to escape. Who does that? Jewish Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont wrote on Twitter, quote, at a moment when the U.S.-made bombs are devastating Gaza, killing women and children, we cannot simply let another huge arms sale go through without even a congressional debate, end of quote. Puerto Rican Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez also posted on Twitter, quote, the United States should not be rubber stamping weapons sales to the Israeli government as they deploy our resources to target international media outlets, schools, hospitals, humanitarian missions, and civilian sites for bombing. Her ancestry is Jewish. She is a Sephardic Jew. And I'm guessing neither of these so-called lawmakers care that they may be condemning their own families. These blanket accusations against Israel paint the Jewish state as one that intentionally targets civilians using American munitions. The tone is stridently anti-Israel and seemingly pro-Hamas. Jonathan Schnauzer, Senior Vice President of Research for the Foundation at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, told the Jewish News Service that the opposite is what's true. He said the assistance Americans had supplied Israel has allowed it to strike surgically at Hamas targets, which has allowed it to achieve a low civilian casualty rate. It is these munitions that have helped Israel keep this fight to a surgical nature. As for the progressive group of legislature, Schnauzer said they are small, but they are very loud. What is remarkable, he observed, is the tone of some of these legislators as they stridently attack Israel and seemingly support Hamas. International law recognizes the inevitable reality of civilian deaths in war. It's tolerated as long as it's proportionate. Some accuse Israel of targeting civilians, but it is well known that Israel goes out of her way to save human life. The Israel Defense Forces intentionally use precision-guided munitions in an effort to kill only terrorists and avoid the civilian deaths. What's the difference? Israel has the technology to protect itself from the Arab rockets, which are indiscriminate, fired and left to land where they may. And there's no mention of this from the liberal wing. Schnauzer went on to say how that, quote, Hamas has tried to kill more civilians and has tried to do more damage to Israel, and that this remarkable technology has prevented them from doing so. Israel should not be blamed for saving the lives of its own people, nor should it be blamed for responding to aggression. The global rule of thumb: if you are attacked, you have the right to retaliate, to defend, and to even try to stop further attacks. And that's true across the board, except if you're Israel. Or, in a growing way, the United States. And that's because we have bigger and better weapons. And it's not fair. Don't hit the guy who is bigger and stronger than you are if you don't expect to get a beating. The U.S. and Israel are the tough guys. You go after them at your peril. Schnauzer added that he has a hard time recalling another conflict where this rhetoric has been wielded to try to hamstring the party that did not start the war. He said it is truly remarkable. He also addressed the existing misconception in the U.S. regarding the Sheikh Jarrah property dispute in eastern Jerusalem. Sheikh Jarrah is a predominantly Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem. It's about a mile north of the Old City. It's traditionally home to the Arab elite. Israel occupied that district in the Six-Day War of 1967. It is currently the center of a number of property disputes between Palestinians and Israelis. Both the mainstream media and many Democrats view the issue as one of the top reasons behind the hostilities, an issue that is not new and that came to the fore this year during Ramadan, reaching a pressure point on May 10th, which just happens to be Jerusalem Day. This is routinely used by Hamas and others as the reason for their attacks. Schnauzer said the Israeli court system is a legitimate court system that is generally beyond reproach, and it has ruled that, quote, this is not an act of military aggression taken by Israel. The first act of military aggression was taken by Hamas. Of course, all of this is largely lost in the mainstream media here in the U.S. Did you know this current conflict arose after Palestinian Authority leader Mahmoud Abbas canceled Palestinian elections scheduled for May 22nd? And why did he do that? Because it became clear that Hamas and Abbas, the other rival, were likely to be victorious. Hamas stirred tensions in Jerusalem, especially on Temple Mount, to assert itself after Abbas canceled the election. See, this was not about Israel. But more than 4,000 rockets were fired directly into civilian areas of Israel because of it. Does any of that make sense to you?